The first time Colton Hayes saw her, the desert was holding its breath, stretched wide beneath a bruised Arizona sky, where the sun bled slowly into the horizon, and painted the mesas in fire and
shadow, and he had ridden farther than he meant to that evening, chasing a stray heifer that turned out not to be stray at all, but merely stubborn, much like himself, and by the time he realized how close he had come to the edge of Apache land, the cattle trail had vanished into red dust, and the world had grown so quiet that even the leather creak of his saddle sounded like an intrusion. Colton was a man shaped by routine and regret, broad, shouldered from years of hauling rope and memory, with a jaw set firm not because life had been kind, but because it had not, and as he guided his bay, gelding up the rocky incline toward a ridge he did not yet know would change him, he was thinking not of borders or danger, but of the hollow space waiting for him back at the ranch house, the chair across from his own that had been empty since the fever took his father 2 winters ago, the silence that settled at dusk like a second skin. He reached the crest, and there she stood as though she
had risen from the earth itself, a lone figure against the burning sky, long dark braid resting against a deerskin shawl, posture straight as a spear, and for a moment he thought she might be a trick
of heat and loneliness. But then she turned, and her eyes found his, deep and steady and entirely unafraid, and in that look there was something that unsettled him more than a drawn rifle ever could.
Because it was not hostility he saw there, but recognition, as though she had expected him long before he knew he was coming.
He slid from the saddle slowly, palms open, aware of the fragile line he stood upon, yet she did not reach for any weapon, did not retreat, did not harden her expression into the distrust that history would have justified, and when she finally spoke her voice carried like wind slipping through canyon stone, low and deliberate, asking why he rode so close to land that was not his, and he could have offered the easy lie about lost cattle or wandering fences, could have wrapped himself in the armor of casual ignorance, but something about the way she watched him stripped pretense from
his tongue, and he found himself answering with a truth he had not planned to share, that sometimes he rode simply to outrun the quiet, that the ranch felt smaller each season and the horizon larger.
That he did not always know what he was searching for except that it was not behind him. Her gaze did not soften exactly, but it shifted, as though she weighed his confession and found it neither threat nor boast, and she told him her name was a pony, that the ridge he stood upon belonged to her people long before maps carved it into territories, and that wandering without knowing what one seeks can be more dangerous than riding toward an enemy, and there was no accusation in her tone, only observation, which somehow felt heavier.
Colton had known Apache only as distant figures moving like ghosts across far hills, stories told in town with too much whiskey and too little understanding, yet standing before a pony he felt the
absurdity of those tales crumble, because she was not myth or menace but presence, vivid and real, and when the wind shifted it carried the faint scent of sage and river water, and for a suspended
second neither spoke, the silence stretching not in hostility but in awareness, until he nodded once in acknowledgment of boundaries he had crossed and swung back into the saddle, offering no promise
except that he would remember this ridge differently now. As he rode away, he felt her gaze linger between his shoulders, not like a mark but like a question, and long after the mace had dipped behind him,
he could still see her silhouette etched against the dying light, as if the desert itself had introduced them with deliberate care.
The days that followed did not allow him the luxury of dwelling on mystery, for ranch life demanded attention with relentless practicality. Fences sagged, calves needed branding, a storm rolled through and scattered part of the herd toward the river, and yet beneath each chore ran a thin current of thought he could not quite dam, the memory of her steady eyes returning unbidden at odd
hours, and when at last he found himself riding again near the cotton, wood-lined banks where water carved its patient path through stone, he told himself it was coincidence, though some quiet part of him knew better. She was there, kneeling at the river's edge with her sleeves rolled and her hands submerged as if listening to the current speak, and this time she did not wait for him to approach, but glanced up with the faintest curve of knowing at her lips, as though the land had informed her of his return before his horse's hooves ever touched gravel.
He dismounted at a respectful distance and removed his hat, unsure why the gesture felt necessary yet compelled by instinct to offer it, and she studied him with the same deliberate calm as before,
asking if he had found what he was looking for beyond the ridge, and he gave a small shake of his head, admitting that the horizon had remained stubbornly silent, and that confession opened something between them, a narrow bridge of shared vulnerability that neither had expected. They spoke then not as trespasser and guardian, but as two souls occupying the same stretch of earth, and he told her about the ranch built by hands now gone, about nights so quiet he could hear his own pulse and wished for anything loud enough to drown it, while she spoke of elders who watched the land change beneath iron rails and distant gunfire, of stories carried in language that fewer children now chose to learn, of a fear not of battle but of erasure, and as he listened he felt something inside him rearrange, a slow shift from inherited prejudice to earned understanding. Their meetings were not frequent, nor were they dramatic, but they carried weight, like stones placed carefully to form a crossing over deep water, and each time he rode away he felt less certain of the simple narratives he had grown up with, less willing to accept the version of strength that required silence and distance. And on an evening when the sky bruised purple with an approaching storm, he found her again at the river, standing barefoot in the shallows as thunder murmured low beyond the mesas, her eyes closed, face lifted as if in communion with the heavy air. He approached quietly. Yet she sensed him, turning before he spoke, and the closeness that followed was not rushed but inevitable, like rain gathering before release, and she studied his face as lightning flickered faintly
along the horizon, telling him that his eyes carried storms he refused to name, that he wore grief like a coat he would not remove even in heat, and the accuracy of her words struck deeper than any
an assault could have.
He attempted a laugh, a deflection honed by years of practice, but it faltered under her steady gaze, and when she stepped closer the space between them filled with more than tension. It held the
fragile courage of truth waiting to be acknowledged. She reached for his hand, calloused and uncertain, and placed it against her own heartbeat, strong and unwavering beneath warm skin, and the
gesture was not intimate in the way townsfolk might gossip about, but profound in a manner that unsettled him more, because it demanded presence without armor, and her voice when she spoke was softer than thunder, yet carried more force, saying that his people feared feeling, that they buried sorrow beneath work and hid longing behind pride, that strength did not mean absence of pain, but willingness to carry it openly. And then she whispered the words that would echo through him long after the storm had passed. "Let me feel everything,"
the Apache said, and the cowboy was left speechless, because in that request was not seduction but surrender, not demand but invitation, and he realized with a clarity that frightened him that she was asking not for possession but for honesty, for him to stand before her without the practiced stoicism that had defined his manhood since boyhood.
Rain began in hesitant drops that darkened dust and cooled heated skin, and he felt the years of unspoken grief press against his ribs as if seeking release, memories of his father's final rasping
breath, of arguments never resolved, of dreams abandoned for practicality, and for the first time he did not push them down, did not turn away, but allowed the ache to surface, raw and unpolished. and tears he would have once considered weakness blurred his vision as thunder cracked overhead. Yet she did not flinch from them, did not look away, instead resting her forehead gently against his. In a gesture that felt less like romance and more like recognition, two histories meeting without conquest, and in that storm-washed moment he understood that courage was not found in silence, but in vulnerability, that the bravest thing he could offer was truth unguarded.
The rain fell harder, soaking denim and deerskin alike, yet neither retreated, rooted not by defiance but by choice, and when at last he found his voice it emerged rough and uncertain, admitting he did not know how to promise safety in a land bristling with tension, did not know how to bridge worlds divided by more than distance, but he could promise to feel, to listen, to stand without hiding.
And her answering smile held both warmth and realism, as if she knew the path ahead would not be gentle, yet believed it worth walking nonetheless. Lightning split the sky above them, and for
Heartbeat illuminated their joined silhouettes against the riverbank, a fleeting image that seemed carved into the desert's memory, and when the storm finally began to drift eastward, leaving behind
the scent of wet earth and something newly awakened, they parted not with dramatic vows but with quiet understanding, aware that what had begun on that ridge and deepened by the river was neither
simple nor temporary, but a shift in the very way he understood himself.
As Colton rode back toward the ranch under a sky scrubbed clean by rain, he felt altered in a manner that defied easy explanation, as though the landscape within him had been reshaped by unseen hands, and though the world beyond remained tangled in conflict and change, he carried with him the echo of her words like a steady drumbeat, a reminder that to feel everything, grief and hope, feel and connection was not weakness but the truest measure of strength. And somewhere beyond the cottonwoods a pony walked her own path with the same fierce openness, knowing that even if history pressed
hard against them, that storm-marked evening had proven something undeniable, that when two souls dared to stand unarmored before one another beneath a restless sky, even the hardest cowboy could be humbled into silence by the simple, fearless courage of being fully alive.